joined by Gabrielle. Gabrielle, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Gabrielle. I'm currently a cloud security engineer in healthcare. My background is in kind of the science healthcare space. I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit, but just here to talk to you today about whatever you want to talk about in the healthcare security space.
Awesome. So make sure to fire your questions in. And what I kind of want to know about, and this is something we've delved into our blogs and stuff in the past, and something we've kind of really scratched the surface of, is the tie-ins with ransomware attacks.
Yeah, so ransomware has been growing like crazy, and unfortunately, healthcare is very vulnerable to that. It's one of those industries where I think the amount of time that you're down is definitely, it affects people a lot more directly as far as health and well-being and safety and things like that. And I know last year we saw a ransomware attack in Germany, I believe, that ended up having to reroute someone from the ER to another hospital, and she died en route. And that was the first time we had an incident where it was suddenly like, okay, like this is actually physically hurting people now and becoming an issue. So I know here in the US, we've had quite a few healthcare either attacks or ransomware lockdowns or something along those lines. And it definitely is one of the fields that I think is being targeted a lot more specifically because it's so critical.
I seem to remember something along the lines of there was kind of a ceasefire for a short time when the pandemic started, in terms of hackers and not really launching too many attacks, and then it seemed like that went out the window, and they just came out the industry with everything they had.
It really depends on the group. There are quite a few groups that don't want to attack any kind of healthcare because their aim isn't to hurt anyone. I know there was a group here in the US at one point. It was one of the bigger attacks, but when they realized, they thought it was a university system, and when they realized it was a hospital attached to a university system, they unlocked everything. So a lot of the groups kind of have that like moral code of not wanting to hurt people specifically. But yeah, it was definitely, there was a little bit of a ceasefire, I think, as far as COVID went at the beginning, because everyone was just so overwhelmed. And I think shutting down health centers and medical centers would have been really, really devastating at that point. But yeah, it's ramping up again, it sounds like.
I definitely heard about the university one where they ended up attacking. They didn't even realize. If I remember rightly, they tried to retract from that. Is that right?
Yeah, I think they realized it was the university, and I believe they unlocked the data and like they were like, here, take it back.
Yeah. So it's kind of odd that there's a little bit of a soul, a little bit of heart in there in what they're doing, even though it might not seem like it. But it's very interesting. I mean, I've read so much about how it's vulnerable through some of the systems, things connected to the internet that don't need to be or shouldn't, or should or need to be, and just aren't secured whatsoever.
Yeah, the problem with the healthcare space is that there's a lot of embedded technology. I mean, you've got an MRI machine. I don't even know how much they cost. It's a lot of money. And when you've got software on that machine, you're not going to want to replace that machine until you absolutely have to. But a lot of times these operating systems and software on the machine are kind of a stripped down version of what you would normally see. And that makes it harder to update. A lot of times the manufacturers kind of like drag on updates for those, or they're just, you have to have someone come and update it. And eventually, you reach end of life and you don't want to replace your expensive machine. And suddenly you have these machines running on really, really old, out of date software. And that's when you start running into some really big issues when it comes to healthcare infrastructure.
Yeah, so in the big way, it is down to budget.
Yeah, in a lot of ways. I think if everyone had unlimited money, I don't think security would be as much of a question, right? Because we just throw money at all of our problems. But unfortunately, it's a lot of it's prevention, and a lot of companies, I think, are trying to weigh that risk of, if you pay for it ahead of time and it doesn't happen, then are we getting our money's worth? It's hard to sit there and prove that you are getting your money's worth for security, because if it works, nothing happens.
Yeah, there's quite a few things like that, and you need that justification, right? You need those numbers in a lot of instances. I believe we were talking to a guy, Ikram, last week, and he was saying that they kind of ran simulations to show that what could happen, what could potentially happen, and the devastating effects to justify in the first place to have security, which seems like a crazy thing to have to do. But as you said, yeah, it's like when things are fine, you don't want to throw money at it, but that might be when you need to, because and the next attack could be around the corner.
Yeah, definitely. And I know other companies have kind of weighed the risk of paying the ransom as well and said, hey, the ransom is going to cost less than it will be to secure whatever, or pay for whatever. And that's when you kind of start running into, that's a little bit of an ethical issue when you've got people's data on the line. So
yeah, and I guess that must be a tricky, and especially in healthcare when systems are down, things are not working, critical services that you need, and you can just pay a ransom and it all goes away potentially, as opposed to waiting for things to come back. I think that's a common thing now, like whether to pay it or not. I see that quite a lot.
Yeah, and there's some really varied opinions in our field too. It seems like some people are a little bit more empathetic. They understand it's not always so easy to restore from a backup or just get things back up and running. So sometimes that is a need to pay the ransom. And then there's a lot of people who don't sympathize with that and say, hey, paying the ransom is encouraging bad behavior. And I mean, even the government at times is kind of like, okay, let's talk before you pay a ransom, you know? So
yeah. Well, they really put you kind of between a rock and a hard place in these situations, and I think there's no easy decision, even if there is kind of maybe a morally right choice to make. I don't know. It's hard to say unless you're actually in that situation.
I think it's definitely case by case, and it depends on the type of data too, as well. I mean, if you've got people's health information on the line, then that's an issue. I know there's been other ones where it was just, I guess some of it was like payment system data, which is also an issue, but at least you don't have people's health information included in that. Other times it's something completely unrelated, and then you're like, okay, well, this doesn't actually have any private information. So
I guess there's always a situation as well where you pay and they maybe unlock your data, but it doesn't mean that they've released all of it and they're not keeping any of it. So you're always potentially risking that. So I guess you'd never really want to be in that position in the first place. Yeah,
there's no guarantee that they're going to do what they say they do.
Yeah. So we have David who asked, what are some of the most vulnerable devices to attacks in healthcare?
Yeah, so a lot of these have just been kind of proof of concept and luckily have not been exploited out in the wild, knock on wood somewhere. But I know one of the really big ones that has been researched is an internal defibrillator, which is kind of like a pacemaker. And it wasn't the specific device itself, it was the programmer for the device. And it was able to be loaded with whatever software you wanted to put on it and transmitted to the pacemaker. So someone did a demonstration and was able to, deliver an insane shock to, I mean, he didn't do it, but he would have been able to. It was a proof of concept. A couple of others, a lot of infusion pumps, like the medicine delivering systems in hospitals that you see people hooked up to IVs and stuff like that. Those are, they a lot of times have a host of issues. We found like hard-coded credentials in some of those and stuff like that, just really not good things to have sitting there. And then honestly, just as a general rule, hospital security, I mean, like I said, there's a lot of outdated software. It's hard to have that time to patch everything and update everything because there's no really downtime at a hospital either. So it gets really easy to fall behind, I think, and that's kind of where you start seeing some of that vulnerable infrastructure.
Yeah. So Matthew Smith said, a lot of small companies in America that work with the government in some capacity are worried for their future because government contracting companies are being required to adopt very cyber policies that cost a lot of money to implement and manage. Cost is a real problem, especially because it doesn't contribute to company revenue.
Definitely. That's kind of what we were saying. Is you spend a lot of money on security just to see nothing happen. And that's the point. But it's hard to justify that to management a lot of times when you're saying, hey, let's put all of this money into prevention, and you don't really have anything tangible coming out of it.
Mm-hmm. And how would you say is the best way to go about that? How is the best way to justify this?
Definitely kind of doing that proof of concept, like you said. I mean, there's a lot of ways that people can kind of prove worst case scenario. I think that's helpful. If you have, I know like a lot of companies have outside companies do penetration testing or anything along those lines, and those can kind of be an eye opener too and say, okay, like this is what could have happened. You know, someone that wasn't hired by us could have found this, and that would have been a problem. So I think really just, yeah, kind of justifying, coming up with examples, coming up with ways to say, hey, if we don't do this, there will be a tangible result, and kind of spin it that way is the easiest way to get people on board.
Yeah, I can imagine even with that, there's quite a lot of pushback. I mean, getting people to spend money is always a tricky thing, especially if they're not actually receiving something for that money. And as Matthew said, it's not contributing towards company revenue, but it might be saving a huge amount of money long term with some of these ransomware payouts or the fines that some certain companies face.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
So Adam kind of repeat his question from earlier. So he said, how is your journey getting into cloud security, and how is it different to a normal cybersecurity analyst role?
Okay, well, I studied psychology and neuroscience in college, so completely unrelated to this field. After I graduated, I worked in like genetic science, pharmaceutical regulation for a while, just kind of doing the science thing. But in that role, I also worked a lot with medical devices because they're regulated under the same kind of umbrella at times. And I kept dealing with medical devices that had vulnerabilities, and I was just, my mind was blown. I was like, why are people trying to do things to these medical devices? Like, what is the gain in this? How does that work? I kind of started to fall down that rabbit hole of information security. I did a lot of self-study, and eventually got a job as a security analyst with my former company. So that was kind of your standard analyst role. I was working with a lot of different types of clients. It was a consulting firm, so just lots of different types of data, really just trying to learn my way around the security space. And then about a year ago, I moved into the cloud security space, and it's been a little bit different. I'm not an analyst, I'm an engineer, so I get to assist with, architecting and building some of the secure infrastructure that we need, which is really interesting. But also just learning some of the different cloud environments is really interesting as well. I know we use quite a few different ones. So even though the premise is the same for a lot of them, there's little differences about each of them that makes it a lot of information to learn.
Mm-hmm. And Adam, you may be interested. We actually ran a series of interviews with cyber experts, including Gabrielle, and those are going to be coming out over the West Point Cyber Talent page over the next year, because we actually spoke to about 60 different people. So that explains a little bit more about how you got into the role, what you enjoy about it, and various other things. So make sure you catch that when that comes out. We're in the editing stage, as you can imagine. With 60, it's quite a long process there. So the next question is from David, and he asks, what do you recommend biomedical engineers / clinical engineers to do to minimize the attacks on these devices in the absence of cybersecurity systems / expert?
This is a tricky question because a lot of times you're kind of at the mercy of the medical device manufacturer or someone along those lines. But I think if there's an update, just trying to keep up with the updates. I mean, just use basic security hygiene as well. Don't leave things unlocked. Don't put a sticky note with your password on it on whatever device you're using. Just, I guess, little things like that can make a big difference, because a lot of the breaches you see aren't anything insane. They're through that same, like, most used vectors, like you see the OWASP top 10 or something along those lines. I mean, those are listed for a reason because they're the most commonly used tactics, I guess. So yeah, just good security hygiene and keeping up with updates as they roll out on your devices and infrastructure.
Excellent. And then we have another comment from Matthew Smith, who said, there is this card game called Backdoors and Breaches that helps simulate a hack and how a company would respond to it, and then the results of that. I feel like this is a good way to represent company risk in an interesting way. But yeah, one of the previous speakers on one of these events, Klaus, who actually set up those within the Cyber Lounge. So if there's kind of an appetite for that, for you guys to kind of come together and take part in those events, we could encourage Klaus to set up a few more of those and run them. Do you have any experience with those, Gabrielle?
I have not played that game. I've heard of it. I know people that really like it in the industry. I think it would be something really interesting to do, especially with some of the like incident response and offensive teams in a company, just to see kind of how people take on different roles, and the way that people think, I think, is a big contributor to that as well. And then obviously presenting those results. So it's something on my radar. I haven't gotten to play with it too much yet, but I do think that is a good idea as far as trying to, prove risk, I guess, to management.
Yeah, and from what I can tell, it's supposed to be quite fun as well. So there's a little added bonus there. But yeah, certainly if anyone's looking to represent that risk, it could be a potential option. So while we're kind of waiting on a few more questions, it'd be interesting to find out a little bit more about how you see not just the current landscape of the healthcare industry with cyber, but going forward. I know we're kind of on what seems to be the tail end of the pandemic right now. So how do you see it moving forward from here?
During the pandemic, there were a lot of exploits that were using COVID kind of as an in as well. Just either through phishing. I know people that, got phone calls. I think it was NHS was affected in the UK. They got phone calls that were saying, hey, this is for COVID, like call this number, give this information, stuff like that. And obviously everyone's a little on edge because there's a pandemic, and people are more likely to believe that since it's kind of a panicked situation. So I think we're seeing that ramp down a little bit, but we are seeing more attacks on critical infrastructure. I mean, I don't know how much you've seen in the news, but we've had quite a few in the US here that have been pretty crazy, between the pipeline and the meat company and whatever else has fallen kind of on some of the bigger infrastructure here. So my hope is that doesn't happen to healthcare, but it's kind of the trend right now. Just bigger attacks. My real wish for the future of the healthcare security landscape, I guess, is that people start to really take it seriously and say, okay, like these are people's lives directly, at the other end of whatever this attack is. And I think that needs to be treated with a little bit more urgency and a little bit more care. So my hope is that, a lot of these health companies and hospitals and medical centers and things like that start to take a little bit more caution when it comes to security. Yeah,
I think that's definitely a trend that I'm seeing pop up bigger kind of scarier attacks on more vulnerable targets. I'm not sure exactly where it was, but there's attacks on like preschool, primary school. So this is like your equivalent of kindergarten. Attacks on those, which is just like, it's incredibly unnerving.
Definitely is.
Yeah. So Matthew, with another comment, said, I know that a lot of manufacturing devices use legacy protocols to communicate. I don't know if medical devices are the same, but how would you recommend securing this other than buying a newer device that uses more secure protocols and integrates with newer OS versions?
It's kind of similar to the question we were talking about before, where you know, a lot of times you're kind of at the mercy of the manufacturer, because even I believe the FDA requires that the manufacturer be responsible for the software updates of these devices, especially if it's adapted from, you know, a well-known software. So say there's a special version of Windows or something on one of these medical devices, you have to wait for your update from the medical device manufacturer. You can't just go to Windows and download the newest patch, unfortunately. So your hands are kind of tied a lot of times using these legacy protocols. I guess just making sure you stay really on top of any new releases of software, end of life alerts. You know, if they're going to stop supporting certain software, I would start pushing for a newer device, or seeing if there's any way that you can continue to get updates, things along those lines. And again, just security hygiene. I mean, it's hard when you can't update anything and your hands are tied, but just making sure that you have the basics covered will go a long way.
Awesome. Just remember, guys, we've got a couple minutes left. If you want to chuck any questions our way, Gabrielle will be able to answer them. Just going back, I did see a comment from Adam. He just asked, how long did you work as a cybersecurity analyst before moving to cloud security?
I worked as an analyst for about 2 years. Just kind of, I mean, it felt like it took me forever to just figure out what was going on. Moving from a non-tech field into a security-related position was a really big jump. So I felt like I kind of spent that first year playing a lot of catch-up. And even now, there's a lot of times where I feel like I look back and there's security-specific things that I know really well, but there are basics that I still need to fill in.
Yeah. Obviously, Adams must be quite interested in that career path. Yeah. So hopefully you can watch the video when that comes out and get even more information. So kind of going back to the future and the state of things. So we kind of talked about how you see. So how, given that the pandemic is now kind of slowing down, are we seeing any changes right now, other than the hackers like kind of? Let me try and think what I'm trying to say here.
Yeah, no, you know, not as many as I think I've expected. Especially, I think a lot of companies and people have gotten comfortable with the idea of working remotely.
Yeah.
And a lot of that initial exploitation of, you know, any vulnerabilities in that area has kind of leveled off a little bit. There's not as many people going back into the office as I thought there would be, so there's not as much of a shift or advantage for people to take, I guess, there. So I feel like it is leveling off a little bit, but I think that the attacks are starting to get bigger, and I think that kind of embargo that a lot of groups put on attacks has been dissolved for sure.
That's an interesting point, because when I think healthcare, I kind of don't link that in my head with remote, because I imagine hospitals and clinics and so on. But obviously there's, I'm sure, just as many people working remotely within the same industry. And it must have been quite jarring initially to move in that industry more than perhaps others.
Yeah, not always hospital staff, but even just pharmaceutical companies. You've got people that are dealing with claims. You've got people that are dealing with, you know, specific study data, things like that. So even though the hospital staff is generally not working from home, there's still a lot of kind of adjacent companies, I guess, in the field that you have people's personal health information suddenly on all of these people's home networks.
So it looks like we've got time for one last question from Matthew, who said, what would be the best way to monitor the integrity of these devices? Are there SIEM tools focused towards non-networking/workstation devices? Or is there another solution I should be aware of?
That's a really good question. That might be something I need to look into more, because I haven't really, I know we generally stress, use intrusion prevention, intrusion detection, use a SIM tool, stuff like that. But as far as specifics, I'm not sure what the best solution is for that kind of thing, and whether there is a tool that focuses specifically towards devices or workstations or something like that in like a large network hospital. So that is something I'll have to look into, and I will have to follow up with that answer for sure.
Awesome. A lot of good questions, Matthew. So thank you. I think we're about at time, unless anyone has any last minute questions they want to chuck. But it was great to have everyone. Thanks so much, Gabrielle, for joining us here today. Thanks, of course, to the whole audience, and for a couple of people in my team for helping to set this up, who are backstage here right now. So we do have a couple more events over the next few weeks, so make sure to join us in the Cyber Lounge group on LinkedIn. You should be able to see a little banner informing you of that below the video right now. So that's the first place you can go to catch any of these upcoming events. Obviously, within the Cyber Lounge, we'll continue this discussion, so any more questions, you can either fire them there or potentially get connected with Gabrielle on LinkedIn or myself, and we'll keep the conversation going.
Yeah, it was so nice to talk to you today. Thank you for having me.
No worries. Great to have you. So yeah, I think that's it from us. So everyone have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you at the next one.